So I'm John Lehigh. I was the executive director of the Metropolitan Baseball Stadium District and came to Colorado to help develop and build Coors Field. It was a very interesting project. We had a lot of fun doing it. It's hard to believe it's been so long ago. The Coors Field is now the third oldest ballpark in the National League. Really amazing that it's been that long.
So John, one of the challenges I know that you had as an executive director of the Stadium Authority is that the legislation that you were given to work with, in order to get that legislation passed, it couldn't have a fiscal note or a financial impact with it. And so what you got was a charge of a list of things to do with no funding to do it until an election passed. How did you deal with that?
Well, once, in the time until the election passed, it was hard to just sit back and wait. But we had, our architects, HOK, did a lot of work assuming that we would get it passed and got us started on that path. And it was once the legislation was done and the vote passed, and the team was awarded, then we had the ability to go to the marketplace and issue debt. And it was that turning point which allowed us to really go forth with the ballpark. But those things had to be in place before we could do anything. So those were sort of the precursors to the whole development.
So were you involved in the site selection process?
I was in the tail end. We were down to a couple of sites when I actually came to town, and we're well along with the Union Pacific site. That was the principal site. I think, if I remember right, that made up 90% of the land. There were just a few parcels besides that we had to acquire. When I came to town in late 90, when did I come to town? Late 91. We had like a 24-month, or 24, let me say that again. The task in front of us was to close on the land with Union Pacific by January 1. And that was about 2 months after I came to town. So we had a lot of work to do in a very short period of time. But we got it done, and we got the land, which was the first step.
Did you already have HOK?
Yeah, HOK was on board by then, and we had some preliminary plans, and we knew what we needed to do at that point in time. Certainly a long way to go, but we knew how the site fit together and how the ballpark fit on the site.
So who preceded you as executive director of the Stadium Authority?
There wasn't one. Because there was no funding, the district board had no staff and no support. And once the funding was approved, or once the team was awarded, then they could proceed to get the funding, and they hired me to take over and put together the district. But when I came to town, there was no staff, there was no office, there was a board of 7 people, and the board said, good luck and have at it. I had a wonderful board to work with. It was just a wonderful board to work with, and they supported everything that I did as I came to town. I had some office space with our attorneys, Fairfield and Woods at the time. They gave me an office, and they gave me a support person to help me get started. We had no personnel plans, we had no insurance policies, we had no policy at all. There was nothing there. And so we had to develop all of those pieces along with trying to develop a ballpark. And I set out to have a very small staff, and in the end we had, I guess, I think we had 5 full-time staff to do the whole project, along with our consultants. But it was quite a task when I first came into town.
So what inspired you to take a job with such challenges in front of you?
Well, I always enjoyed sports as I was growing up. I played baseball in high school. And in the late 80s, you'll recall, the real estate market was very slow. And so I was kind of bored. I was in Dallas, kind of looking for things to do, and a good friend of mine who had built many stadiums called me one day and said, Miami and Denver are going to get franchises, and Miami has a stadium, but Denver does not. So you should try to find out if you could get involved in that. And I found out. I didn't know anybody in Denver to speak of.
Wow.
In fact, I was kind of surprised that I even got a return call, but I found out there was an RFP for an executive director out. It could be a person, it could be a firm. I read the RFP and I said, that sounds a lot like me. And so I sent a response off, and probably 30 days went by and I hadn't heard anything, and I said, well, on to the next task. And then I got a call out of the blue and they wanted me to come for an interview. Came for an interview, and next thing you knew, I had a job.
Wow, so you packed your bags and moved to Denver?
Yep, moved the family to Denver, and never expected I would stay here the rest of my life, but here I am.
One of the other challenges that I know the Stadium Authority was dealt was the fact that you did not have eminent domain power, and that subsequently you ended up having a challenge with one of the property owners. Would you like to talk about that?
Well, I think that's true. We did not, and our task and what the board asked us to do was to make sure we spent the taxpayers' money wisely, and we got appraisals on the few parcels that we needed to acquire, and used those appraisals to, try to negotiate to a fair price. And we were successful in most cases. There was one case we weren't, and at the end of the day, the issue of eminent domain came back around to the legislature. It got approved at the last session, and then we were able to negotiate to a fair compromise. And through an arbitration process, we acquired the land at a value that we felt was fair and fitting.
So while you didn't use the eminent domain power, it was a negotiating tool that you had in your toolbox to...
Until we had that, we had no negotiating leverage at all, and that enabled us to come to a compromise.
So for the selection of the architect, were there different people who made proposals, different companies?
Most of that happened before I came here, so I know there were a couple, 2 or 3 firms anyway, that proposed. HOK was the, shall we call them, the hot architect at the time on baseball stadiums. They'd just done Camden Yards, and they were in the process of Cleveland. So I think that played a big role in trying to make a final decision. But they were already on board when I came to town. Just really begun.
Okay, and in terms of designing the stadium, how did it came out great. Were there any particular things that were put into the mix?
Well, we always felt it was very important to fit into the character of Lower Downtown, and we worked a long time with HOK, and we had a group called I think we called them the Citizens Advisory Group, to work with us on the design and review plans and provide advice and consultation. I think it was a very interactive process. We met many times, and HOK did a wonderful job of picking up the character of the neighborhood, and I think as it stands there today, it looks like it's always been there. But the nature of the brick and the facade were all part of the neighborhood and part of Lower Downtown. So it's worked out to be, I think, a terrific asset to the community.
So you had a very short fuse between when you came on board and when you needed to have a brand new stadium.
We did. And one thing about stadiums is when the deadline is. You can't miss the deadline. It's opening day.
Right.
And we were able to accomplish that in a good, reasonable amount of effort went into it, but it was a great project.
Who were the primary contractors and how did they interact?
It was a joint venture of Barton Mallow and Mortensen, and they put together a joint team of people. Barton Mallow had built Camden Yards, and Mortensen had a strong presence in Denver. And the two of their teams that came together, you wouldn't know who was who in the office. It was really like one team. And they had the stadium experience and they had the local knowledge. And they did a great job. And they met all the challenges of the schedule and the time, because it took everybody's effort to get there.
So one of the discussions that I had had with the outlying counties was would it make sense to have a stadium located maybe in Adams County or Douglas County or whatever. And I understand that you had a submission from Douglas County at one time that you had to deal with. Do you remember much about that?
Yeah, I think that preceded me.
Okay.
I don't remember. I think I might remember hearing of it, but I wasn't involved in that particular piece of it. I think that decision was pretty much down the road before I got here.
So just a general time frame. So you had HOK involved in designing the stadium. When roughly did that get done, and when did the construction start? Obviously it had to get done by April of 1995.
Yeah, well, let's see, when did all that happen? We started construction, I'm going to have to think a minute, sorry, but I came the end of 91. We went through design in 92. We started construction probably early 93, late 92, early 93. Probably started site work in late 92. The design was just sort of an evolving piece all the way along, and we designed the structure and the foundations first, and moved our way through the rest of the design. You know, the interior design was finished probably in late 93, early 94 for some of the club levels, suite levels, concourses, all the food, furniture, and fit out. So it was really a rapid process, and I honestly don't remember when we broke ground, but it had to be in late 92. We probably started foundations, and I just saw something that the dinger was hatched. I saw it on a dish I had at home this week. It's so funny. Dinger was hatched in center field in the spring of '93, I believe, right before the season started. And I remember finding his egg out in center field. And out popped Dinger.
Gee, how old is Dinger today?
That would make Dinger pretty old.
Well, it's interesting how the finding the bones led to the mascot. I'm sure a lot of people wonder how that happened.
Yeah, I think it was before the season started. They needed a mascot. So we put a pile of dirt out there and put something under it and had a big press conference, and out popped Dinger. So that must have been March of '93, would be my guess. And, so he would be pushing 24 now, going on 25.
Right.
So traditionally, it's my understanding that baseball stadiums are built from home plate out, and because of the challenges that you had with the property at home plate, I understand that you had to use a little unique approach in terms of building this stadium.
Well, we started at the foul poles and moved in, and fortunately it all connected when we got there. In today's technology with GPS and everything else, I suspect that it would not have been nearly as scary. But it was, there's sort of normally you just start at home plate and work yourself out, but because of the challenges we had and really logistics of the site, it worked out well to start in the outfield and work back towards home plate. We got all that done, and good surveying crews got us where we needed to be.
So once we started setting attendance records, I guess the ownership decided 43,000 seats wasn't enough and they needed another 7,000. How did that work?
Well, we added seats 3 times. First,
Three
we
times.
added 1,000 seats by adding a row around the top deck. And a few months later, that didn't seem to be enough, so we added the sections in right field that are now where all the entertainment area is. But we added those sections. That upper deck was not there in the original plan. We already had poured the foundations and had steel in, but we were able to reinforce the steel and add
Really?
2 more. It was 3 more sections in the upper deck of right field. None of those were there. And that added another couple thousand seats. So we're now up to 45. And shortly after that, there were still more season ticket holders than there were room for public to go. And we added the rock pile, which was nominally 5,000 seats. And so we made 3 individual adds well along in the construction phase.
So the rock pile wasn't originally part of the
It
plan?
wasn't originally part of the plan.
I know that certainly the Denver metropolitan area was in a recession, as was most of the country at that time. And we had ultimately approved 3 construction projects all at the same time. DIA, the Denver Public Library, and Coors Field. Did you ever have concerns that there would be enough steel or concrete or labor competing with those other 2 projects?
You know, we didn't have any issues with that. The labor was available back in those days. It was, as you said, coming out of a recession, and so we had real good response from the crews, and we had good labor forces, labor crews that it worked out well. And you know, it just never was a conflict for us.
So you had a tight time frame. Was there any point where you didn't think you were going to make the April 1995 deadline?
Never. That wasn't an option. And I think to the credit of our design team and our contractor and everybody else involved, I mean, there was just never any question they were going to make it. And having done that before, you know, and having built Camden Yards and having worked on other ballparks, I mean, there was an understanding that whatever it took, it got done. And the partnership between the architect and the contractor was terrific. And all the architects' consultants, they were always together. Whenever there was an issue, they solved it immediately, and there was just never any question that we'd get done.
So when you got to opening day, were there any adjustments you had to make to the park?
Had to take the snow out of the seats. As you recall, it snowed the night before opening day. But no, really, the park has withstood the test of time, I think. And there certainly have been some modifications, but not a great deal. And I think to the Rockies' credit, they've done a really good job of maintaining the facility. When you walk in there today, even though it's 23 years old, it looks like it's brand new. It's hard to believe it's the 3rd oldest park in the National League. It's hard to believe.
So how did you feel on opening day when they were playing baseball out there?
Yeah, it was probably a hard thing to remember. It was, you know, I think more so the night before when we gave the keys to the Rockies. That was quite a night, and the snow was coming down. So we knew we were going to have an interesting day the next day. But you know, it was a culmination of a lot of work on everybody's part, and we were just a small part of it. You know, it was years. You guys were working on this for many years before I even came to Denver. It was a long process, and it was sort of the end of that process, but certainly a rewarding feeling to see the game actually played.
So after that was finished, what did you do next?
Well, I decided I wanted to stay in Denver, and I worked on a couple of projects in lower downtown, and then I found my way to redeveloping Stapleton, the old airport. And I've been doing that for nearly 19 years now. And it's been a wonderful project, much like Coors Field, except much, much bigger, and certainly one that continues to grow and develop.
You know, as we reflect certainly on Coors Field, what do you think about the changes that you've seen since you came to Denver in terms of lower downtown, the change of seats to a party deck?
Well, I think there's certainly many opinions, but I think Coors Field itself accelerated the growth of lower downtown by years. If on its own it would have continued to develop and evolve, but I think Coors Field just, threw gasoline on the fire. It ignited the development in lower downtown. And as you look back on it and you look at all that's happened, and now happening up in Rhino, all of those things have just evolved so quickly over the last 20 years. It's hard to imagine how much has gone on since that point in time. But I think Coors Field was certainly a catalyst that accelerated that activity. It, would have happened in time, but I don't think it would have happened this quickly. I think the ballpark has withstood the test of time. I think the addition of the seats in right field, or the party deck in right field, has been a good thing. It's brought young people to the ballpark, and it's not a place I choose to watch the game, but it's a great place to go and party. And I think we've seen a lot of younger people come because of that.
So do you have any final thoughts on your involvement in the whole process?
It was a great experience, and I had just a wonderful time doing it. But I also decided one ballpark was enough, and I didn't want to try to repeat it. So it was a great time in all of Denver's life to have that happen. And I think it continues to be a great place. People still show up all the time, and it's a real family venue.
Thank you, John.
Okay, you're welcome.
Yeah, great job. Thank you so much.